I've always been a quiet person. A little too quiet, some people would say. But that's fine with me. I've never been one for too much socializing or excitement. I'm the type to stay in, read a book, watch some TV, or mess around on the internet. It's peaceful. I don't need much more. I didn't even get a cat to fill some void or for emotional support, like most people do. I just thought they were cool. I like animals in general, and a cat seemed like the right fit for me. Not too much hassle, but still companionship. I named him Felix. He's a big, fluffy thing with thick orange fur, and I don't know how anyone can miss him when he's walking around. At first, Felix wasn't much of a hunter. He was content to lounge around the house and nap, which worked for me. But recently, something has changed. It started when I noticed him sitting by the window, staring intently at the ground. I thought he was just bored or maybe watching a bug crawl by. But then I saw it for myself. One evening, I spotted a mouse darting across the kitchen floor. I didn't think much of it. We've had a few mice in the house before, nothing too unusual for a home in the middle of nowhere. But when I saw Felix's reaction, that's when it hit me. He didn't rush after the mouse. He didn't jump or start making any noise. He just sat there, his body rigid, his eyes locked on the little creature as it scurried across the floor. And then, something strange happened. Felix, in one smooth movement, dropped to the floor. I could hear a soft rustling from his collar, the bell tinkling briefly, and then nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was like the bell had just disappeared, muted in an instant, like a switch had been flipped. He moved so silently that I couldn't even hear him breathing. His large frame, normally clumsy and goofy, was suddenly filled with an eerie stillness. It was like watching a predator, something far removed from the lazy house cat I thought I knew. Before I could react, Felix lunged, and in one swift motion, he had the mouse between his paws. It was over in seconds. I stared at him, frozen in disbelief. Felix, the big galoot I thought I knew, had just performed a hunt with the precision of a wild animal. It wasn't the first time I'd seen him catch a mouse, but this was different. This time, it wasn't just instinct. It was something deliberate, controlled, and, most unnervingly, it was silent. Over the next few days, Felix's behavior became even stranger. I started noticing the same thing happening over and over. Whenever he saw a mouse, he'd go completely still. His body would freeze like he was assessing the situation. The bell on his collar would become utterly inaudible. It wasn't like he was trying to sneak up on the mice. It was like he was just focusing, like he could turn the world off around him and hone in on the task at hand. I can't tell you why, but the more I watched him, the more unsettled I became. Something about the way he was able to become so silent, so calculated, made my skin crawl. The thought of him, that Felix, the one who could make himself vanish into the shadows, his movements as fluid and deadly as a jungle cat, hunting me instead of mice, began to gnaw at my mind. It's ridiculous, of course. Felix is just a cat, a big one, sure, but a cat nonetheless. Yet, the more I observed him, the more my mind wandered. What if he was always capable of this and I just never noticed? What if he was always a hunter and I was just too naive to see it? What if one day I wasn't watching him closely enough? One evening, after he had caught yet another mouse, I sat down in my chair and stared at him. He was licking his paw, nonchalantly cleaning himself as though nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the thought. What if he was planning something? Felix had always been a little unpredictable. He'd go from being a cuddly lap cat to suddenly bolting out of nowhere, running around the house like a madman. But this was different. I started seeing his behavior in a new light, his calmness, his focus, his sudden stillness, the way he could turn everything off and slip into a different world. The bell on his collar, that damn bell. It was supposed to be a warning to the mice, but it didn't seem to matter to him anymore. The way he could turn it off made me feel like I was missing something crucial. It was as though Felix was adapting, evolving, finding ways to hunt without detection. That, in itself, was unnerving. I found myself watching him more and more, even when he wasn't actively hunting. He would sit in one spot for hours, barely moving, his eyes always scanning. There was an almost unnatural intensity to him now. I could swear that his gaze would linger on me more than it used to. His amber eyes would follow my every movement, never blinking, always watching. A few nights ago, I was in the kitchen, fixing myself a late dinner. The house was quiet, too quiet. Felix was lying in his usual spot by the window, his eyes flickering between the dark outside and me. I could feel his stare, like it was penetrating me. I tried to shake the feeling off, but it wouldn't go away. Suddenly, he moved. It wasn't like before, when he had a purpose. This time, he moved almost casually, but his stillness made it all the more unnerving. 1 minute, he was there, lounging lazily, and the next, he was gone, his body vanishing into the shadows. I didn't even hear him move. I froze, a knot forming in my stomach. I stood there, in the dim kitchen light, listening, waiting, and then I heard it, a faint rustling from the hallway. At first, I thought it was just him being playful, but then it came again, a soft scrape against the floor. It was slow, deliberate, like something large was moving carefully through the house. My pulse quickened. I turned toward the hallway, expecting to see Felix, but he wasn't there. It was dark, and I couldn't make out much, but I could hear him. His movements were so quiet, almost like he was waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to do something. I grabbed the nearest object I could, a kitchen knife, and held it at the ready. It was stupid, I knew it was, but in that moment, the idea of Felix, the cat I'd been so comfortable with, stalking me through my own house sent a wave of panic crashing through me. I didn't dare move. I waited, every fiber of my being straining to hear the faintest noise. The seconds stretched into minutes. I wasn't sure how much time had passed when I heard it again. A soft, deliberate thud, as if something heavy had settled onto the floor. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, but I knew one thing. It was too quiet. It felt like my mind was playing tricks on me, but I couldn't shake the growing fear that Felix, the cat I had trusted, was no longer just a pet. He was something else, something I wasn't prepared to confront. And then, from the darkness, I saw a shape. It wasn't just Felix, it wasn't the cat I thought I knew. This was something more, something larger, more powerful. His body loomed in the dim light, his eyes glowing faintly, his movements slow and controlled. I didn't think. I bolted. I ran out of the kitchen, down the hallway, but it felt like Felix was right behind me. Right there, moving silently, patiently. I couldn't see him anymore, but I could feel his presence, the weight of it pressing down on me. I reached the door to the outside, my heart racing in my chest, but it was locked. I fumbled for the keys in my pocket, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. Just as I was about to get the door open, I heard it, a soft, low growl. It wasn't the playful meow of a cat. It wasn't even a hiss. It was something far darker, something primal. I managed to unlock the door, and the instant I did, I threw it open, running out into the yard without a second thought. I didn't stop until I was in the woods behind the house, my breath ragged, my legs burning, and still I could feel it, the sensation that Felix was there, waiting, watching. I've been staying at a friend's place since then, and I'm not going back. I don't know what's happened to Felix, but I'm certain of one thing. He's no longer just a cat. Something has changed in him, and I don't think I'll ever be safe in my own house again. I can't stop thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't gotten out. Would I have made it out alive? Or would I have become just another prey, another victim of his newfound hunting instincts? I don't know, and I don't want to find out. I had been walking for what felt like hours, the ground soft beneath my boots, the trees towering above me like silent sentinels. The air was thick with the earthy scent of damp moss and rotting leaves. It had rained the night before, and the woods seemed to hold onto that moisture, the trees slick with it. I didn't mind. I liked the silence, the solitude of being out here, away from everything. It was supposed to be a simple hike. I'd set out that morning from my car, heading into a part of the forest I hadn't explored before. There was a trail, marked by faded white blazes on the trees, but after a while, it had faded into something less defined. I didn't mind that either. The woods had a way of making me feel small, insignificant even. There was something peaceful about it, like the world outside didn't exist here. I'd gone off the trail a bit, just to explore, to stretch my legs and see what I could find. The further I walked, the less I felt connected to the usual world. I was in a different kind of space now. The usual sounds of the forest were muffled. No birds, no animals scurrying through the underbrush, just an oppressive quiet. I paused and looked around. The trees were close together here, their trunks gnarled and twisted. A few of them were dead, their limbs bare and jagged against the sky. Their presence felt off, like they didn't belong, but I didn't think much of it at the time. It was only when I noticed something on the ground that I started to feel uncomfortable. There was a patch of dirt, mostly covered by leaves, but something in it looked strange, like something had been dragged through it. I knelt down to take a closer look. The marks were faint, but the impression of something heavy, something large, had left an indent. The earth around it was disturbed, and a few broken branches lay scattered in the area. I frowned. It wasn't an animal track. No, this was something else. I stood up, scanning the area. That's when I saw it. A glimpse of something just beyond the trees, moving between the trunks. I froze, my heart kicking into overdrive. It wasn't much, just a shadow, but it was enough to send a cold chill creeping down my spine. I shouldn't have gone after it. I knew that. The woods were dangerous, even if they didn't seem it. But my curiosity got the best of me. I wasn't lost, at least not yet, and the idea of following whatever it was had a magnetic pull. I stepped lightly, trying to make as little noise as possible. The underbrush was thick, the ground uneven, but I pushed forward, feeling like something was drawing me in. The more I moved, the more I felt like the forest was closing in around me. The trees were so thick now that the light barely reached the ground, and the air felt colder. I didn't see the figure again, but I could feel something watching me, lurking just out of sight. My instincts told me to turn back, but I ignored them. The sense of being observed only grew stronger, and I kept pushing forward, deeper into the woods. Then suddenly the world shifted. The trees ahead of me opened up into a small clearing, and in the center, there was something that made my blood run cold. A large pile of what looked like animal bones lay in the middle, half buried in the dirt. There were pieces of fur tangled in the bones, remnants of something that had once been alive. My stomach turned. I took a step back, instinctively reaching for my phone, but the signal was weak, just a few bars that barely made a dent in the empty feeling in my gut. I looked around the clearing. The bones weren't just scattered. They were arranged in a way that looked intentional, like someone or something had placed them there. The air felt thick with something dark, and a heavy sense of unease settled over me. I didn't know what to do. My feet were rooted to the ground, my mind racing. This wasn't right. None of this was right. But what really struck me, what really made my heart skip a beat, was the realization that I wasn't alone anymore. From the edge of the clearing, barely visible between the trees, I saw movement. Not the shadow of a person or an animal, but something much larger, much darker. It was big, too big for any animal I knew to live in these woods. I froze again, my breath catching in my throat. Whatever it was watching me, and I could feel its eyes boring into me from the darkness. I didn't know what to do. I was in the middle of nowhere, with no clear path back, and now it seemed like whatever had been following me was getting closer. I looked over my shoulder, my mind racing. Should I run? Should I stay still? I didn't have much of a choice. The figure took a step forward, and I could hear the crunch of leaves underfoot, slow and deliberate. My body reacted before my mind had a chance to decide what to do. I turned and ran. I didn't look back, not even for a second. I could hear something behind me now, something large, moving fast through the woods, crashing through the undergrowth. I pushed myself harder, dodging trees and rocks, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My foot caught on something, a root or a rock, and I stumbled, falling to the ground hard. My hands scraped against the dirt, and I felt the sting of a branch across my face. I had no time to even check for injuries. I scrambled to my feet, my legs shaking, and kept running. I wasn't sure how long I ran for, but eventually, The sounds of whatever was chasing me started to fade. I didn't dare slow down until I was sure I had put enough distance between myself and whatever that thing was. The woods were still and silent again, but the air felt charged, like something was still out there, waiting. I stumbled back onto the trail, my mind still racing. I didn't stop until I saw the clearing where my car was parked. The sun was beginning to set now, casting long shadows across the forest floor. I didn't care. I just wanted to get out. When I finally reached my car, I slammed the door behind me, locking it immediately. I sat there for a moment, trying to calm myself, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. My heart was still pounding, my mind replaying everything that had happened. I didn't go back to the woods after that. I've never told anyone about what I saw or heard out there, but I know one thing for sure. I was being hunted. Whatever that thing was, it was watching me the whole time, waiting for the right moment to strike. And I'm certain it's still out there, somewhere, deep in the woods, waiting for the next person to wander too far. It was the 5th day of our trip into Grand Gulch, and I was already tired in a way that didn't just sit in my legs. It lived there. I was only 11, and even though I had been on a handful of trips before with my parents, this one had stretched me in ways I hadn't expected. We had already hiked for miles through deep canyons carved by centuries of water and wind, following faint footpaths and dry washes, navigating slick rock, and moving between pinyon pines and sandstone walls that seemed to breathe with heat. We had seen ruins tucked into alcoves, pottery shards still hidden in the sand, and ancient handprints stained on rock walls. We packed light, dehydrated meals, water filters, a tiny stove, sleeping bags, and a tarp that barely qualified as shelter. It was beautiful, yes, but brutal too. The kind of landscape that didn't care if you were ready for it or not. By the 5th morning, it was time to head out. We knew the final push would be hard. My stepdad had explained that the trail we were using to exit the canyon was faint, maybe non-existent at some points, and we'd have to go by landmarks more than clear markers. We were supposed to crest the canyon rim and bushwhack until we hit an old dirt road where we had cached a mountain bike. Our shuttle, so someone could ride the last 8 or so miles to the van and come back to pick the rest of us up. We started the morning early. I remember the coolness of the air and how dry everything felt. The sun was still low, and our shadows were long, stretching across the slick rock like they wanted to stay behind. I was already low on water, and I could see the same worry on my mom's face even though she tried to mask it. We had passed plenty of water pockets days before, and now we were leaving all that behind. There was nothing but wide open desert ahead. Climbing out of the canyon was harder than I imagined. The trail disappeared almost immediately, and we had to pull ourselves up steep, dusty slopes with loose rock crumbling beneath our feet. I slipped more than once and scraped my palms trying to catch myself. My pack felt heavier than it had the day before, even though I'd eaten most of my food and drank most of my water. By the time we reached the top and crested the rim, it became obvious that we had made a mistake. We weren't where we thought we'd be. We stood looking out at a wide expanse of desert brush and flat sandy ground, and none of it matched the topographic lines or faint jeep roads we had on our crumpled map. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough to know that we were off course. And out there, off meant miles. My parents stood quietly, looking out over the open land, and I remember the way the wind picked up a little, pulling at the brim of my stepdad's hat. We could see for miles in every direction, but none of it gave us any answers. Still, we knew the general direction the dirt road and our van were supposed to be, so we picked a bearing and started walking. We didn't talk much. We were tired and focused. I kept staring down at my boots, watching the dust collect on the toes and trying not to think about how thirsty I was. My water bottle was nearly empty. We were conserving what we had left. I started thinking about all the water we'd passed earlier in the canyon and how far below it was now. I tried not to think about how dry my mouth felt or how cracked my lips had become. I licked them out of habit, but it didn't help. We walked for hours under the sun. The higher we went, the more exposed we became. No tall trees, no real shade, just low shrubs and gnarled junipers. Even the pinyon pines seemed too sparse and too far apart. The land rolled in soft ridges, and every time we crested one, I hoped we'd see something. An old road, a sign, anything. But each ridge gave way to another and another. That night, we stopped under a pinyon pine that barely offered enough cover for the three of us. We laid out our gear and split the last of our food, 2 small power bars between the three of us. I remember chewing slowly, savoring each bite even though it stuck to the roof of my mouth. I drank one last small mouthful of water before lying down. The ground was dry and hard, and the wind picked up through the night, rustling the dry needles above us. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay there staring up through the branches, watching stars burn silently overhead. The cold crept in slowly, and I curled deeper into my sleeping bag, trying not to think about how far off course we were. The desert looked dead at night, just rocks, shadows, and the occasional scuttling of something unseen in the brush. I felt small out there, more than I ever had. By morning, our water bottles were dry. I could see it in the way my parents moved, slower, more deliberate. We packed up quickly and continued walking, hoping we might find the dirt road or any sign of human presence. The sun came up fast, and with it came the heat. It beat down on us like it had something to prove. My shirt clung to me with sweat, and I started feeling lightheaded if I walked too fast. After a few miles, we finally found what looked like a faint road. Just a set of old tire tracks cut into the desert, weaving between sage and pinyon, nearly swallowed by sand and time. It didn't feel like much, but it was something. We followed it, and the more we walked, the more defined it became. The tracks deepened, and the road straightened. I could feel my spirits lifting just a little. Eventually, after another hour or two, we reached the bike cache. It was just a cheap mountain bike we'd locked to a dead tree, surrounded by a few rocks to keep it hidden from view. My stepdad checked the tires, still inflated, and without saying anything, unlocked it, slung his pack over one shoulder, and started pedaling. My mom and I sat down in the dirt. We didn't have any shade, but we were too tired to care. The sky had changed while we waited. A dark gray storm was building in the distance. The clouds rolled in low and slow, and I could smell the rain in the air before it hit us. When it finally came, it wasn't just a drizzle. It was a full-on desert downpour. At first, I just sat there with my head tilted back, mouth open, letting the water fall straight in. Felt like the best drink I'd ever had. My mom did the same. We were soaked within minutes, but we didn't care. I felt like laughing, like crying too. The ground turned to mud quickly, and the road behind us became a slosh of wet sand and clay. We kept walking, hoping to see the van or my stepdad coming back to get us. Every bend in the road, every slight rise gave me hope, but we saw nothing for what felt like forever.
My legs weer sore, my knieën stiff, my feet ashing in my boots.
The mud sucked at our steps, clinging to our soles, making every stride feel heavier. Hours passed. The storm let up eventually, but the clouds lingered. The road twisted and turned, cutting through gullies and across dry creek beds. We kept going. When we finally reached the primitive parking lot, I almost didn't believe it was real. There was the van, parked at the edge of the lot like a mirage, and my stepdad was there, soaked, covered in mud, and frantic, rushing around the van trying to get it to start. But nothing. The battery was dead. We were stuck again. Without saying anything, he got back on the bike. The tires now caked in thick mud, the frame splattered. He pedaled off again, toward the highway, another 6 miles away, to try and flag someone down. My mom and I waited. We sat on the ground next to the van, now cold and exhausted. I pulled off my boots and rubbed my sore feet. My fingers were wrinkled from the rain, my clothes still wet. Time passed slowly. I stared at the clouds and the wide open space around us. Nothing moved, not even a bird. Eventually, maybe an hour or two later, we heard the sound of an engine. A truck pulled up, a ranger at the wheel, and my stepdad in the passenger seat. Relief didn't come all at once. It sank in slowly, like the weight of what we'd just done didn't want to leave all at once. The ranger helped us get the van towed and drove us into Blanding. I remember sitting in that truck, the air conditioner humming, feeling the cold air on my face and closing my eyes. It felt surreal to be sitting there, after everything, like we had stepped back into another world. In town, we got the battery replaced, checked the engine, and filled up on food and water. I remember sitting in a booth at a small diner, eating a greasy cheeseburger and fries, drinking 2 full glasses of cold water and then a third. The salt, the grease, the cold. Everything tasted like a reward. That night, we stayed in a cheap motel on the edge of town. I showered for what felt like an hour, watching the dirt and sweat spiral down the drain. I crawled into a real bed with clean sheets, and for the first time in days, I felt warm and safe and still. That trip never really left me. Even now, years later, I can still remember the dust in my mouth, the sting of my sunburned shoulders, the sound of rain hitting dry earth, and the way the road appeared out of nowhere when we needed it most. It was the kind of experience that shaped me without asking, the kind that left a mark beneath the skin. And even though we made it out, and even though we were okay in the end, I never forgot how small I felt out there in that endless desert, and how close we came to not making it back at all. I've always had a strange relationship with my cat, Oscar. He's an orange tabby, with those big eyes that seem to reflect an intelligence far beyond that of a regular house cat. I never thought much about it when I first adopted him. He was just another pet to add to the family, a little companion who could curl up next to me and make me feel less alone. But over time, I began to notice things about Oscar that didn't quite add up. Things that made me question whether there was something more to him than I realized. It started with the bell on his collar. I know, most cats wear bells, especially if you live in a rural area where mice and other small critters are common. The idea is that the bell warns the prey, giving them a chance to escape before the cat strikes. But over time, I learned something unsettling. The bell didn't matter to Oscar. At first, I figured he was just a lazy cat, not much of a hunter. But then, one afternoon, I saw something that left me shaken. Oscar had a habit of sneaking around the house, especially when I wasn't paying attention. One day, I noticed him walking quietly through the living room. The bell on his collar was jingling lightly, but only a few faint tinkles echoed through the room. The sound was faint, but I could tell that Oscar wasn't moving like a regular cat. It was almost as if he was walking with intent, like he knew the bell was there and was doing his best to make it sound as little as possible. Curious, I decided to pay more attention to his behavior. I observed him closely for the next few weeks, and that's when I realized something that I couldn't ignore. Cats, as I had read, are actually really good at learning how to move without making any noise. I watched as Oscar would walk through the house, his paws barely making a sound. The bell would jingle ever so softly, but it was like he was controlling it. He was so quiet, so deliberate, and so smooth in his movements that it almost seemed impossible for a cat of his size to be so stealthy. But that wasn't the most unsettling part. Oscar had always been a little mischievous, but I never thought he could do anything too out of the ordinary. However, one evening, I witnessed something that made my blood run cold. It was a quiet night, and I was sitting in the living room, reading a book. The room was dimly lit, with just the soft glow of a lamp casting shadows on the walls. I had just turned a page when I noticed Oscar staring at something behind the wall. At first, I thought he was just being curious, like he usually was. But then he moved. Oscar slowly crept around the corner of the wall, where he could no longer see the kitten, who was playfully chasing a toy on the floor. I watched closely, thinking that he was just going to join in the fun, but instead, something strange happened. Oscar didn't walk around the wall the way I expected him to. Instead, he laid down beside a crumpled jacket on the floor. He stretched out, curled up, and then vanished. It wasn't that he disappeared in the sense of a magic trick or anything. No, it was more subtle. One moment he was there, his body still clearly visible from the way the light hit him, and the next, nothing. There was no Oscar, just the jacket, crumpled on the floor, and the kitten looking around, confused and meowing in a way that was almost pitiful. I blinked, unsure if I had seen it correctly. Had I missed something? How could he just vanish like that? I got up and went to the spot where I had last seen him. I looked behind the jacket, under the furniture, and around the room, but there was no sign of Oscar. He was gone, like he had melted into thin air. It took me a few seconds to catch my breath, to process what had just happened. But when I turned back toward the living room, there he was. Oscar was sitting calmly, as if nothing had happened. He was by the window now, lazily watching the trees sway in the wind outside, as if he hadn't just pulled off the most bizarre disappearing act I'd ever witnessed. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. Something about it didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the first time he'd been able to sneak around and surprise me with his stealth, but this was different. There was something almost unnatural about the way he moved, how he could just disappear like that. It was like he had a secret, something I wasn't supposed to know. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. The more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just a trick of the light, or maybe I had imagined it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Oscar than I was seeing. A few nights later, I was once again sitting in the living room. This time, I was watching TV, not really paying attention to anything in particular. But as I sat there, I started to notice something strange. The atmosphere in the room felt different, thick, tense. I glanced over at Oscar, who was lying by the door, his eyes fixed on something in the corner. His eyes were wide and unblinking, his body still. I tried to ignore it at first, but I couldn't. Something was off. His gaze seemed to pierce the room, like he was watching something that I couldn't see. I looked over at the corner where he was staring but saw nothing. Then, the air in the room seemed to grow heavier, and a deep, unsettling chill crept up my spine. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like the room had shifted in some way, like the atmosphere had thickened with a sense of dread. Oscar's eyes didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't even twitch. I could feel my heart start to race. For some reason, I stood up and began walking toward him, wanting to see what he was looking at. But as I did, I noticed something strange. My footsteps weren't making any sound. I wasn't being quiet on purpose, but I couldn't hear the usual creaks of the floor beneath me. The silence in the room was overwhelming, suffocating. I reached out toward Oscar, but the moment I touched him, he snapped out of his trance-like state. His head jerked toward me, and I swear his pupils dilated. His body tensed as if I had just interrupted something important. I stepped back, my mind reeling. What was going on with him? What had I been missing all this time? I spent the next few days thinking about the strange occurrences. I decided to keep my distance from Oscar for a while, though I couldn't help but watch him. The way he moved, the way he could make himself disappear into the shadows. It was like he had control over his own presence. It was like he could vanish, become unseen, without making a sound. Then, one evening, I finally decided to confront him. I was tired of being afraid, tired of not knowing what was going on. I walked into the living room, where Oscar was once again sitting by the window. He was just watching the world outside, the same calm demeanor as always. I stood in front of him, unsure of what to say, but I needed answers. I wanted to understand what was happening. I needed to know if he was still the same cat I had brought home, or if something had changed in him. Oscar didn't look at me. His eyes remained fixed on the window, his fur still and unruffled. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was aware of me, that he knew I was standing there. Suddenly, I heard it, a faint rustling from behind me. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but there was nothing there. I turned back to Oscar, and that's when it hit me. I wasn't just afraid of him disappearing anymore. I was afraid of what would happen if he didn't disappear. If he stayed, if he began to watch me too closely, if I couldn't escape his gaze or his presence. I realized then that I had no control over him. I never had. Oscar had always been able to move without making a sound. He had always been able to blend into his surroundings, to vanish without leaving a trace. It wasn't just that he was sneaky. It was that he had the power to be completely invisible when he wanted to be. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I could live with that. I moved out of the house a few days later. I still think about Oscar from time to time. I don't know where he is now. I don't know if he's still in the house watching me, waiting. But I know one thing. I'll never look at him the same way again, because I saw what he was capable of, and I realized that I had been living with a predator the entire time. We'd planned the trip for over a month. It was early July when we finally got the chance to go. There were 5 of us, me, Chris, Mark, Jared, and Steven. All of us had done backpacking trips before, though this would be one of the longer ones. We were headed into the Sierra Mountains in California, planning to stay out there for a full week. The area we picked was remote, but still legal to hike and camp in without a permit as long as we followed bear safety protocols and didn't stay too long in any one place. We mapped out a route through some high alpine terrain that would take us over 2 passes and through several valleys. We each packed our gear carefully. Everyone had their own pack with a sleeping bag, tent, food, and clothes. We brought a couple bear canisters and a bear bag between us. There was no cell service out there, and we knew we were on our own. That's part of what we liked about it. There's something quiet and peaceful about being far enough away from everything that the only thing you can hear at night is the wind in the trees and the sound of your own thoughts. The first 2 days were pretty smooth. The weather was dry, and the sky stayed clear. We hiked hard during the day and set up camp before sunset each night, always making sure to follow the usual steps. Hang the bear bag at least 100 yards from our tents, cook away from the sleeping area, and keep anything with a scent out of our shelters. That included all food, drinks, toiletries, basically anything a bear might sniff out. On the 3rd day, we climbed up and over a steep pass that led into a wide basin with a shallow lake in the middle. It was one of the more scenic spots on the trip, and we agreed to camp there for the night. We found a flat area surrounded by trees about 200 feet from the lake. There were no signs of recent activity, no bear scat, no claw marks on trees, nothing to make us worry. We set up our tents in a circle, about 15 feet apart from one another, and cooked a simple dinner of rice and beans on a small stove. When it came time to hang the bear bag, everyone tossed in their food and any scented items. I watched as each guy took his turn walking over to the bag and stuffing their gear inside. I don't remember anyone acting careless about it. It had become such a routine that we didn't even think twice anymore. Steven had the bear canister in his pack, which we placed nearby, but everything else went in the bag, which we then hoisted up a branch about 10 feet off the ground and 5 feet away from the trunk of a tall pine. We stayed up for a while after sunset. It had cooled down quickly once the sun dipped behind the ridge. We sat around with our headlamps off, watching the last of the light fade over the lake and listening to the breeze through the tall trees. That's one of the best parts of being out there, the quiet. Eventually, we all turned in. I zipped myself into my tent, crawled into my bag, and stared up at the inside of the nylon roof for a while. I think I fell asleep around 11. It must have been around 2 in the morning when I woke up. At first, I didn't know what had pulled me out of sleep. I didn't hear anything right away, but I felt that weird gut instinct that something was off. I laid still in my sleeping bag and listened. That's when I heard the rustling. Not wind, not something normal. It was the sound of something heavy moving through the underbrush. I could hear twigs snapping, leaves rustling, footsteps slow and padded. Then came the yelling. It started suddenly, muffled at first, like someone yelling from inside a sleeping bag or a tent. Then it got louder and I realized it was Steven. I sat up and unzipped my tent door, trying to figure out what was happening. I saw movement in the dark, something big and low to the ground. My headlamp was still clipped inside my tent, so I scrambled to grab it. When I flicked it on and aimed it toward the noise, I saw the bear. It was massive, pitch black and hulking. It had torn through Steven's tent, which was now sagging and half collapsed. Steven was on his back, legs kicking as he tried to push away from the bear's head. The animal was inside the tent with him, tearing through the nylon, its snout pushing at something near Steven's torso. I didn't see blood, but it looked bad. I stood frozen for a few seconds. The beam of my headlamp hit the bear's face, and its eyes glowed green for a moment. Then I heard more movement behind me. Chris and Mark coming out of their tents, headlamps on. Jared was already out, grabbing a pot from the pile of cooking gear and slamming it with a metal spork. The clanging cut through the night like gunshots. I dropped to my knees and started throwing small rocks in the direction of the bear, aiming wide so I wouldn't hit Steven. The bear didn't leave right away. It pulled something from the remains of Steven's tent, a tube of toothpaste, white and flattened. The bear bit down on it, then dropped it and started sniffing the ground. It wasn't scared. It looked annoyed more than anything. Still, after more shouting and rock throwing, it finally turned away and lumbered off into the dark, heading downhill toward the lake. When it was gone, we all ran to Steven's tent. He was still inside, trying to push himself up. The bear hadn't bitten him, but he was scraped up from trying to crawl away and had a nasty gash on his leg from the tent poles snapping. We helped him out and got him seated on a foam pad. His hands were shaking. We poured water over the cut, cleaned it with alcohol wipes, and wrapped it in gauze from one of our first aid kits. Once we were sure he was okay to stay put, we inspected the tent. It was ruined, flattened, and torn in several places. Steven's sleeping bag had holes in it, and his pad was punctured. The rest of us checked our own tents and gear for damage. Nothing else had been touched. The bear had gone straight for Steven's tent. That's when we figured it out. He'd forgotten to put something in the bear bag. We asked what it was, and he finally remembered the toothpaste. He'd used it after dinner and left it in the side pocket of his pack, which he'd kept inside his tent. We were all pissed, but mostly we were just relieved he hadn't been seriously hurt. We didn't sleep again that night. There was too much adrenaline still in our blood, and we knew there was a bear nearby that had just gotten a taste of human stuff. That's not good. We sat in a circle around our makeshift kitchen area and kept the headlamps on. Every so often, someone would scan the trees with their beam just to make sure it wasn't coming back. When the sky finally started to lighten around 5, we packed up. Steven's leg was stiff and swollen, but he could still walk with help. We changed plans and decided to head back the way we came, retracing our steps over the pass. It would take 2 days to get back to the trailhead. We split Steven's gear between us so he wouldn't have to carry a full load. The hike back was slower, but uneventful. We didn't see any more signs of the bear. We kept all food and scented items well away from camp and double-checked everything each night. No one slept much, though. The fear of something walking into camp again kept us on edge. When we finally made it back to the car, we were exhausted. Steven's leg looked worse, but he was able to limp the final stretch. We drove straight to a small town with a clinic and got his leg properly cleaned and stitched. The doctor there said he was lucky, that if the bear had wanted more than the toothpaste, things could have been much worse. We didn't talk much on the drive home. Everyone was tired and quiet, lost in their own thoughts. I kept replaying the moment I saw the bear standing over Steven's collapsed tent. It didn't look angry or scared. It just looked hungry, and it knew exactly what it wanted. Since then, I've never skipped a single bear safety step, not even once. No shortcuts, no excuses, and I've never camped again without triple-checking that nothing is left in anyone's tent. Bears don't care if you're tired or if you forgot something by mistake. They don't know what's food and what's toothpaste. All they know is scent and how to follow it. Steven still hikes sometimes, though he hasn't done any long trips since then. That trip shook him up pretty badly. For the rest of us, it was a lesson learned the hard way. Out in the wild, your mistakes can put everyone at risk. One forgotten item can mean the difference between a quiet night and a near disaster. That was the last night I ever let my guard down out there. I decided to take some time off work in late September to go hiking alone in the Sawtooth Range in Idaho. I had never been out there before, but I'd done solo hikes in Colorado and Montana and figured this wouldn't be much different. The plan was to do a 5-day loop through the backcountry, mostly staying off the beaten path. I'd mapped everything carefully, planned the route with mileage and elevations in mind, and packed for cool nights. I didn't tell many people I was going, just my brother and one friend, both of whom knew my general route and expected to hear from me in about a week. I got to the trailhead in the late afternoon and hiked in for just a couple of miles the first day. I found a flat area near a small stream and pitched my tent there for the night. Felt good to be alone again. There's something about walking alone through wilderness that makes me feel more like myself. Away from the artificial hum of phones and traffic and deadlines. Just me, the pack on my back, and the trail ahead. The next few days went mostly as planned. The weather held up. Clear skies, cold mornings, warm afternoons. I kept my routine simple. Wake at first light, pack up camp, eat a bar or two while hiking, and stop around 3 or 4 in the afternoon to find a place to set up for the night. I'd boil water, make a warm meal, and watch the sun dip down behind the peaks. I'd see deer sometimes, marmots, a moose once far off in a meadow. No other hikers, though, which was fine by me. That was part of the appeal. On the third day, I decided to cut across a basin to avoid backtracking along a narrow trail that was full of deadfall. It looked simple enough on the map. Follow a ridgeline east for about a mile, then drop down into a wide basin and rejoin a feeder trail on the far side. I checked the topo lines. It didn't seem too steep. I figured it would save me some time and give me a bit more of a challenge. The climb up the ridge was slow, but not difficult. The terrain was dry and rocky. There were scattered pines and patches of scree, but I made good time. Once I reached the top, I took a short break, drank water, and looked out over the basin. It was wide, maybe 2 miles across, ringed with dense trees and broken slopes. There was a narrow creek winding through the center, and patches of marsh or grass where it flattened out. I couldn't see any trail from up there, but I knew it was down there somewhere. I started the descent. Right away, I could tell it was going to be harder than it looked. The hillside was loose and uneven, full of soft dirt and rock that shifted underfoot. There were thick bushes that came up to my waist in some places, and I had to slow down to pick a line through it. It wasn't dangerous exactly, but it was frustrating. I tried to stick close to a shallow draw, figuring the runoff would lead me toward the creek. About halfway down, I slipped and landed hard on my left side. My knee hit a rock and sent a jolt of pain up my leg. I sat there for a few minutes, wincing, trying to decide if it was serious. The joint still moved. It hurt to put weight on it, but I could walk. I stood slowly and kept moving, more cautiously now. I favored the right leg, stepping carefully, using my trekking pole like a crutch. The descent took another hour or so. By the time I reached the floor of the basin, the sun was low. I hadn't meant to spend so much time on the detour. The creek was about 50 yards to my left, and I made my way toward it, hoping to find a flat spot nearby for camp. The area near the water was soft and overgrown, but I eventually found a place that was dry enough. It wasn't ideal, surrounded by brush and with little visibility, but I was tired and sore, and I didn't feel like limping any farther. I set up the tent and boiled water for food. I wasn't very hungry, but I made myself eat. The temperature dropped fast, and I put on every warm layer I had. I rubbed my knee with my hands, hoping it wouldn't swell up too much overnight. The pain was dull but steady. I took some ibuprofen and got into my sleeping bag just after dark. I don't know what time it was when I first woke up, but it was dark, and something had changed. At first, I thought I'd heard something, like a rustling sound. I held still and listened. The forest was quiet. No wind, no rain, just stillness. Then I heard it again, not far. The kind of sound that makes your breath catch before you even know what it is. Like something big was moving through the brush. I sat up slowly. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't see anything. I reached for my headlamp and turned it on. The light caught the inside of the tent, pale and useless against the thick blackness outside. I unzipped the flap just an inch and leaned closer, listening again. More rustling, closer now, heavier. At that point, all I could think of was a bear. I knew I'd stored my food properly, hung it high between 2 trees, away from the tent. But I also knew that bears didn't always play by the rules. I turned off the light and stayed still. I hoped it would lose interest and move on. Then I heard a sharp crack, like a branch breaking. Then another. Whatever it wasn't just passing through. It was moving slowly, deliberately, like it was looking for something. I stayed frozen like that for what felt like 10 minutes, maybe more. Then the sound faded. I listened harder, heart still thudding, but it was gone. I waited a while longer, then finally lay back down. I didn't fall asleep for a long time. The next morning, I got up early and looked around. The grass near my tent was flattened in a few places. I followed the prints and found where something had dug at the base of a tree. My food bag was still hanging, untouched. Whatever had been there had come close, maybe sniffed around the tent, but hadn't done anything else. I packed up and limped out of that basin as quickly as I could. It took most of the morning to climb out of it, and I had to stop often to rest my knee. I found the trail again that afternoon, and for the first time in days, I felt relief. The narrow dirt path looked like safety. I followed it for hours, not even looking at my map, just moving. That night, I made camp near a rocky outcrop, away from the trees. I didn't hear anything while I slept. No rustling, no steps, just the wind across the rocks. The last day was long. I pushed hard to make it back to the car before sunset. My knee throbbed the whole way, but I didn't stop. I kept thinking about that sound, that moment in the dark when I knew something was out there, and I couldn't do anything about it. When I got to the parking lot, my car was the only one there. I sat on the tailgate for a while, not ready to drive yet. I didn't feel scared anymore, just tired in a way that was deeper than muscle or bone, a kind of fatigue that sinks into your thoughts. Back home, I looked up bear activity in the area. There had been a few reports that season, but no attacks. Just sightings, warnings. Nothing like what I'd experienced. Maybe it wasn't a bear. Maybe it was a moose or even a person, though I didn't like thinking about that either. The truth is, I'll never know exactly what it was. I just know that for one night, I was alone in a tent with something big and quiet moving just outside. And if it had wanted to, it could have come right in. I still hike, still go alone sometimes, but I double-check everything now. Every food bag, every camp spot, every sound, because I've learned that out there, you don't always get a second chance. Sometimes the only thing standing between you and disaster is a few inches of nylon and whether or not you hung your food high enough. And when the sun goes down and the forest goes quiet, I listen harder than I ever used to, because now I know what it sounds like when something big is walking just outside the edge of your light. I don't really know what made me choose that stretch of trail. It wasn't marked on most maps, and it didn't have a name. Just a faint line that cut across a section of the woods in northern Wyoming, not too far from the Bighorns. I'd been hiking for years and had done several solo trips in the Rockies, so I wasn't new to this. But that trail, if you could even call it that, was a mistake. I see that now. I should have stuck to the main routes, but I wanted quiet. I wanted to be somewhere where I wouldn't run into anyone, where I could walk for days and not see a single person. That's what I got. I started out from a decent-sized trailhead at the base of the foothills. There were a couple of cars in the lot, but by the time I got past the first few miles, I didn't see or hear anyone else. The forest swallowed up the sound of everything behind me. It was the kind of silence that's almost heavy, like it presses down on you from above. My plan was to make a big loop, start on the marked trail for a day, then cut across this old hunting route I'd seen on an old Forest Service map, and rejoin the main path after about 3 days. I'd camp each night somewhere near a water source, carry enough supplies to last 6 days, and use my GPS watch to track the path. I had a paper map too. I always do. Electronics are just one dead battery away from being useless. The first day was uneventful. I walked about 10 miles and camped near a small creek. I was deep enough into the backcountry that the stars came out clear and sharp. I didn't build a fire, just ate a cold meal and turned in early. That night, I heard coyotes far off, but nothing else. I slept straight through until morning. The second day was when I took the cutoff. It wasn't really a trail, just a narrow game path that dipped into a low valley between two ridgelines. It looked manageable at first. The trees were thin and the ground was dry. I followed the line of an old drainage that must have been used by elk or mule deer during the spring. Every now and then, I'd see faint hoof prints or tufts of hair stuck to bark. It was slow going and I had to push through a lot of underbrush, but it still felt like progress. Around midday, the path started to dip into a denser part of the forest. The trees were thick and packed close together, blocking out the sun. I stopped to check my bearings. My GPS was still working fine, and I matched it to the map. According to both, I was still roughly on track. The creek I was aiming for should have been another mile ahead, running east to west across the basin. I pushed on, moving slower now. My legs were scratched from the brush, and I could feel a blister starting on my left heel. Still, nothing felt wrong yet. Not really. Then I came to the deadfall. It wasn't just a few trees. It looked like a storm had come through a few years back and flattened everything in a wide swath about 50 yards across. The trunks were all tangled and rotting, with moss growing thick on every surface. I had to climb, crawl, and squeeze my way over and through it. It took over an hour to get through that mess, and by the time I made it to the other side, I was soaked with sweat, even though the air was cool. On the far side of the deadfall, things changed. It got quieter, too quiet. Even the birds were gone. I noticed it while I was standing still, catching my breath. The air was completely still. No rustling, no chirping, no hum of insects, just silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. I moved on. I started seeing strange things after that. Not supernatural, just odd, out of place. I found an old beer can half buried in mud, the kind with a pull tab that hadn't been used since the 70s. A few yards later, I came across a pair of rusted wire cutters lying next to a tree. Not new, not ancient, somewhere in between. Then I found a tarp, just a corner of it, shredded and faded, tangled in brambles like it had been there for years. I stopped and looked around. There were no boot prints, no clear signs of a camp, just those objects scattered and rotting. The creek I was aiming for was barely a trickle when I reached it. It looked more like runoff from a spring than a stream. The banks were muddy, and the trees crowded in tight around it. There wasn't a good place to set up camp, but I didn't have much choice. I found the driest patch I could and set up the tent. I filtered some water, ate a quick meal, and lay down. That night I didn't sleep. I kept hearing noises. Not animal noises, not the usual night sounds, but sharp, sudden snaps, like sticks breaking under weight. Then silence. Then another crack from a different direction. It wasn't windy. The air was still. I lay frozen in my bag, my heart pounding. I kept waiting for the sound of something breathing, or footsteps, or something, but it was just that pattern. A crack, then silence, over and over, until sometime near dawn when it finally stopped. I got up before sunrise and packed up fast. I didn't eat. I just wanted to move. My plan was to follow the creek downstream until I hit the junction with the main trail. Then I'd loop back toward the trailhead and cut the trip short by a day. I didn't like the feeling in that place. It wasn't just the silence. It was like the forest was watching me, holding its breath. As I moved downstream, the forest got denser. The creek twisted and disappeared in spots under thick brush. I lost sight of it at one point and spent an hour bushwhacking in circles trying to find it again. My GPS kept losing signal, and my compass needle started to behave strangely, twitching like it couldn't decide on north. It was around midday when I noticed I was being followed. Not directly. I never saw anything, but I heard it. Every time I stopped walking, the forest stayed silent for a moment. Then there'd be a faint sound behind me, not always the same spot. Sometimes to the left, sometimes right behind. Just faint footsteps, crunches, a branch moving, then silence. I never saw anyone. I turned in circles, scanned the trees, held my breath. Nothing. I sped up. I didn't run, but I walked fast. The pain in my heel was worse, and my right knee started to ache from a twist I must have taken during the deadfall climb. Still, I pushed on. I finally reached a clearing by late afternoon. A wide, rocky patch where the creek pooled into a shallow basin. I saw old boot prints in the mud near the edge. Relief flooded me. Someone had been here recently. That meant I was close to the main trail again. But then I looked closer. The prints didn't make sense. There were several sets, overlapping in the mud, but they were all headed in the same direction, into the clearing, not out. And they were deep, heavy. Some looked fresh. Others were starting to fill with water. I counted at least 3 different tread patterns. I turned around and looked behind me. Still nothing. I crossed the clearing fast and re-entered the woods on the other side. The trees were even thicker now. The sun was going down, and I knew I had maybe an hour of light left. I was hoping to find the trail before dark, but the path twisted in ways I didn't expect. The terrain didn't match the map anymore. I should have been close, but nothing looked right. Then I saw it. A boot, just one, half sunken in mud, lying on its side. The sole was split, and the laces were missing. It looked old, but not ancient. I walked past it, heart pounding. Then I saw more. An empty backpack, shredded and bleached by sun and rain, a mess of cloth and straps near a fallen log. Then a glove, lying palm up, as if someone had dropped it mid-step. I don't know how I kept moving. The last light was fading fast, and I didn't want to stop, but I couldn't go on in the dark. I found a narrow spot between two boulders and wedged my tent into it. No fire. I didn't even cook. I just got inside and waited. That night, something came close. I heard it moving. Slow steps, not far from the tent. Then something touched the fabric. Just a brush, like fingers trailing along it. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The steps circled once. Then silence. I didn't sleep at all. The first light, I packed up and ran. Limping, scrambling, falling more than once, I pushed through the forest without looking back. By some miracle, I stumbled onto the main trail around mid-morning. I knew it was real because I found a marker nailed to a tree, faded but official. I followed it for hours. My legs burned. My back ached. But I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead. My car was there. No other cars. Just mine. I drove home in silence. I reported what I saw, the boot, the gear, the strange prints, to the local ranger station. They took a report but didn't seem alarmed. That area was known for rough terrain, they said. People get lost. Sometimes they don't get found. That was 3 years ago. I haven't hiked solo since. I still dream about those footsteps. The ones that stopped when I stopped. The ones that never showed a face. Something was out there. Something that knew the forest better than I did. Something that wanted me to leave and made sure I did.